I'm going to say, there's a cellar hole there, believe me. But anyway, we can go to take a look at some of the sites and talk about what background of them probably is. We're going to run up to the yellow trail, the main north-south trail.
You're probably right with the run.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was any running.
That's one way to walk.
We will traverse up to some form.
Let's see if someone would pull me.
Up to the yellow trail. We'll go down by the Boundary Oak. A lot of you know where that is. And that's where one of the home sites is. We'll go on south of there a little ways, and we'll take a short run down our new green trail, which goes across the new acquisition we got, which is really neat. Because it's a better day, we've done a loop around it. But we'll be satisfied with a short run down there, take a look at a couple things, come back and then go north, and then we'll come out up at the Pardon Gray site. So let's go. I'll have to stop and make a few botanical observations on the way, so forgive me if I do that. Here's a couple of trees that are a little bit unusual for Tiverton. They're big-tooth aspen. That's kind of a western Colorado species, although it's native to New England too. And they are one of what's called a pioneer species. They have real tiny seeds, and so open lands, disturbed soils, that's a tree that if there's any around, they'll come in and they'll be one of the first trees that pop up. Those and birch trees are also pioneer trees.
This one with the rough bark, Gary?
Yeah, actually.
I think they're both the same species?
Yeah.
Yep. Just an age thing.
A lot of them look a lot like white birch, particularly the ones out in Colorado. You can see some of them, and the bark is real white. But they all in a forest like this, a little bit more of a closer, the bark kind of gets green. But it also has these horizontal lines like birch trees do. So a lot of times you see an aspen at first glance, and it looks like a birch tree.
Right.
And some of them even are almost as white as a birch. But you don't see too many around Tiverton. There's 2 or 3 up at Fort Barton, and then there's a few along here. And I think maybe this area was cleared not too long ago, so they were one of the first ones to blow in and get started.
Are they quaking?
Yeah, well...
Are all aspens quaking aspens?
Yes, they are. Well, okay. I'll back up a little bit. A quaking aspen and a big-tooth aspen are two different species. Yeah. The big-tooth is a big leaf with a dentelated edge to it, so it's got big teeth on it. A quaking aspen is a smaller version of that, but they are a different species. But they're both in the poplar family, so they have the same basic characteristics. A big tooth is a bigger tree and will survive longer in a forest. The quaking aspen, they only live about 40 years. Both of them root sprout, so they get these clonal colonies that, it's one DNA, one tree that just gets bigger and bigger. In fact, they measured one out in Colorado that they figured was 96 acres or something like that. There was one tree that just kept spreading. So it was all one organism, but it was all all different saplings that come up and just kept spreading.
Where was that?
In Colorado. And the reason they quake, they have the leaf stem is flat and it's perpendicular to the leaf. So you got a leaf here, and you got a leaf stem, and the leaf stem only bends this way. It does that, so a little breeze through thing, and you get the shimmering effect. Yeah, so they're kind of neat. Field birch, because it's a tree that goes into abandoned farm fields, and abandoned meadows are old fields, and so you see them. It's also a short-lived tree, and they're not particularly attractive. They're not pretty like the white birch is, and they only live 30, 40 years and they die off. Another indicator, this probably not too long ago was cleared open land, and these pioneers came in.
This one is fuzzy on that tree. Is that something?
That's lichens. Huh? Yeah, it's lichens.
That means we're in healthy air.
Moss. but it's really not a moss, it's a lichen.
Lichen's one of the first things that's, I understand, affected by any pollution
Yeah.
of that area. So
Yeah.
if you have that stuff around, you're
Yeah.
doing pretty good.
So it's kind of the,
Air-wise.
here's birch catkins. This is probably a little black birch. These are the male flowers, and in the spring they'll kick out pollen, and then there's little tiny female catkins that then make seeds. Here's you can tell a lot. You can identify a lot of trees just by looking at the buds. This is the big cigar of the beech. So this is a little beech sapling, American beech.
This isn't a red twig dogwood, isn't it?
No, it's blueberry.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, high bush blueberry. They have a red cast, like this black birch over here.
That's called river birch as well, isn't it?
River birch is a different species of birch. Black birch, Tula lenta, and river birch is the Tula alleghaniensis, but they're both in the birch family. The river birch, you don't see many of them around here, but they are native to New England. They're more common in river floodplains. Yeah. Just trying to get that sweet birch smell. We'll find another one later. Black birch is got a real intense wintergreen smell. That's one of the ways you can identify it. But anyway, you can see there's a white birch down here, and another oak-wood gray birch. And a lot of these birches in here, they're pioneers, because this had been cut until about 10 years ago, and they've let it Narragansett Electric let it grow up. These are these invasive olives that are everywhere now, and they get in the open.
Russian olive?
Feel like that. Yeah. Brought over as a landscape tree, and they're just going wild now. Yeah, in here.
The wild holly.
Right here, yeah. Yeah, we'll see some better examples. Characterized by plant ecologists as oak holly forest, and that's just a term for the particular plant community that's here, because the predominant tree species are oaks, several different oaks, and this American holly, and it only occurs in 4 states: Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. And it's fairly rare. It's along the coast. You don't see American holly any more than about 10 miles inland in Rhode Island. It goes all south, all the way down to Texas. But this is about as far north as it grows. And this particular plant community, this oak holly forest, is one of the reasons the Nature Conservancy is kind of interested in helping Tiverton preserve as large an area as possible of this, as contiguous area as possible around weetamoo here. So we're hoping to enlarge weetamoo before too long. But you can see them around the woods. Only the female tree has the red berries, and a lot of those may be eaten off by now. Big tooth aspen. You can kind of tell by the character of the branching up there. It's kind of heavy, and the winter buds are kind of heavy and black. I don't want to offend anybody's woodsmanship, but just give you a tip climbing the hill here. Get in the soft snow and kick your toe down. It creates a little step there. It's a lot easier walking. more indicators of the fact that this, not too long ago, was open field. There are these eastern red cedars, and those are very common in old fields. In fact, they will not germinate unless it's out in the open where they get full sun. They germinate, you see them in the old fields. They grow up, and then as the area is populated by deciduous trees that eventually overtake them, they'll then die off, but they need full sun to survive.
Those are not juniper.
They actually are
Right?
juniper.
Okay.
I mean, the common name is eastern red cedar, but their botanical name is Juniperus virginiana. So it is a juniper. In fact, the red cedar is not really a cedar, and the northern white cedar is not really a cedar. So
One of them's an arborvitae, right?
yeah, the northern white cedar is also
white
called
cedar.
arborvitae. Yeah.
But nobody
There's a
has
bayberry.
cedar shingles on their house yet?
Pardon me?
Nobody has cedar shingles on their house.
That's right.
Oh, geez.
It's a juniper. No, it's actually a cypress in the cypress family. This is bayberry. I mean, you can't see much about it. The berries are all gone. Bayberries are wonderful plants for migrating birds because they're full of fat and energy. And even flycatchers like the tree swallow in the fall, you'll see them swarming around bayberry, eating those fatty little bayberries, fattening up for the long trip down to Central America.
Is this Cardin Gray or weetamoo?
Cardin Gray starts the wall there is the separation.
From the dump. From the dump or from weetamoo?
Cardin Gray. Cardin Gray from the other side. The landfill is not, we passed the field.
So we're in weetamoo proper.
Yes. Yeah, this is the main trail from south to north. It comes out at Lafayette Road. And then down Lafayette Road, we have a new little parking area there on Lafayette, thanks to Buzz Lyman and him getting us a grant to pay for that. And it comes out down on it, actually on 8 Rod Way. We're kind of parallel 8 Rod Way here. Nobody knows exactly where 8 Rod Way is, although we think the boundary yoke is on it. So we're probably about halfway in between, north-south-wise, the full between Lafayette and East Road. I was just going to show, maybe we'll see better examples of it, but this is a yellow birch. You can always tell yellow birch because it looks a little bit yellow, but it also has that peeling bark. Even a little more scaly and almost like gold tinfoil, more scaly than the white birch. But it's a beautiful tree. It's the hardest of the birches, and that's what they make the birch plywood out of. And it grows further north than any of the other birches. It's a lovely, lovely tree. Maybe we'll see some more. They get real big. They have this real pretty, scaly bark on it, and then the roots are on the surface of the ground. You can see that gold look to them too. Really pretty when the sun shines on it. All right, off we go. Anybody warm? Yes.
Yeah. We're going south or north?
We're going south.
There.
We're going green. Sassafras. Yeah. America's first export. America was exporting this before there was an America.
For tea?
Tea, and then it got a reputation as being a cure-all, and it was the rage in Europe for decades. And they were sending ships over to America to haul this back before they even settled Jamestown.
Really?
There was a ship that came over about 1600, I think, and they established what was to be a permanent colony on Cuttyhunk before Jamestown. It was going to be the first permanent settlement in America, and they built some houses and so on, and Cuttyhunk was loaded with sassafras, and they had a horrible winter that year, and so they changed their minds, loaded the ship full of sassafras, and went back. so the first permanent settlement didn't happen.
Was it the bark that was exported, or
the roots, the bark, the lumber? I mean, it's one of the first things about going to America was exploring the new herbs and new medicines and new products and so on. It was a very commercial operation right from the get-go. And again, even before it was settled, they were sending ships over here to collect that stuff. I've read advertisements. I mean, things in pamphlets and articles in the European pharmacopoeia and so on, talking about this new wonder herb from America, and a list of things that it supposedly did for you. You'd take one shot of this and you'd live forever. But it was all just hokey.
How about the shape of the leaves?
Yeah, the leaves.
The one with the like a thumb.
Yeah.
As opposed to what? Normal 3-lobe, is it?
Well, they have all three. They have a 3-lobe one, one without a lobe, and then one with looks like a mitten.
All on the same tree.
Oh yeah, all different leaves.
Yeah.
One leaf can look like a mitten.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. So
Art Waterker's got a funny little story. He takes the second graders around every year through weetamoo, and he was showing them the leaves. He says it's got three something, the three fingers and the solid, and then here's a mitten. And he says, about 2 minutes later down the trail, this little guy comes up and says, Mr. Waterker, there's actually 4. And well, what's the fourth one? He said, well, there's a left mitten and there's a right mitten. Oh, right, I scratched this. If you want to take a smell, the bark smells like very lemony, and that was attractive. And the roots have that, the original root beer came from sassafras.
sarsaparilla.
Yeah.
It's been around a while. A long while. That's a dandy, isn't it?
What kind of oak?
It's a white oak.
don't even think about it.
Some of these tree colors, red oak and white oak,
Probably 4 or 2 houses of that.
if you look at them for a while, you start seeing the differences. If you really
white and the red.
in comparison to other trees, like the red maple, you see that all. You see red in that all around. White oak. You sit at the side. Okay, there's a black one. Got the big one there for yellow pine. You look at that bark, and I mean it's not black. It's really brown, but I mean just in comparison to the other. Yeah.
Is this a leaf spot on the...
Yeah, it's kind of a recent thing there. I don't know that it really is personal. There's actually some hickory around here. This big monster tree is it's got a local name as a boundary oak because I kind of think it's sitting here right on 8 Rod Way. When some of the original surveying work done when the weetamoo was being created, this came out pretty much on the boundary. We're going to take a look. One of the old houses that Art Wadaker has found. I think it's about 4 of them sites up and down here that he's located, and they're all kind of like this one. They're up on a high spot. They all kind of sit on 8 Rod Way. There's a cellar hole, and then he's found wells, water wells, dug wells for most of them. There's a real nice well on this one. I looked for it a little bit yesterday, but I was a little antsy about walking around, so we'll miss that today. I mean, it's only a hole about this big around, but it's stone, nice neat stone around it, and you can look down in it. So it's kind of interesting speculation. They know who lived in some of these. They traced some of the land records, and they were not prominent people. And these things tended to be right on 8 Rod Way. Now, 8 Rod Way was just the original right-of-way that was laid out when they laid out the original lots for the Pecasset Purchase. And not all of it was ever a highway or a road or anything. This part here was never actually a road. As you probably know, down on the southern end, there's stone walls on the sides of it, and the landowners down that way have used it as a laneway and so on. But as far as anyone knows, that I'm aware of anyway, it was never a thoroughfare through here. Fish Road is on it, mainly because it goes through the swamp, and so it just never got really cleared and used as a thoroughfare. But it's still a historic right-of-way that the town owns. But what are these people doing on here? Artists found that cellar hole down on the south end there was owned by was occupied by Scipio Cook, who was a man of color, which probably meant he was black. And he may have worked at the mill. This one, I meant to look up the guy. You remember the name of the guy that lived here? But they traced that, the owner of this one, in those times. And there's some speculation that this is swampland. In those times, it was kind of useless. The Native Americans didn't think it was useless because they wintered in the swamp. They had a system they very successfully lived in the swamps. Remember the Narragansetts down near the Great Swamp? They had a fort there in the middle of the Great Swamp and so on. So they tended, as I understand it, to winter in the swamp, and then in the summertime they'd go out on the bay and fish and grow their corn and squash and so on. But anyway, so it was kind of land that wasn't, as far as European culture was concerned, wasn't worth much. This was a farm, pardon gray, way back. So you wonder if this wasn't, some speculation is that this was it was a public right-of-way. Nobody owned it. Nobody cared anything about it. So these people may have just been squatters. Although there was some ownership that has been traced. So there hasn't been a lot of research done in the land evidence records. But all up and down 8 Rod Way, these things tend to be right on 8 Rod Way. That trading post, I'm not sure if how much historical authenticity that has, but there's a local lore says there was a trading post up there on 8 Rod Way, right at Lafayette Road, and there is a large remnants of foundations and another well and a big midden up there and so on. So a lot was going on there. Lafayette, I think, goes way back, so that could have been, kind of a thoroughfare. And
Lafayette was called Brown's Lane, I think.
Yeah, obviously it wasn't Lafayette originally. It's Lafayette. It didn't show up until the American Revolution. But this whole area kind of appears in various places in the Diary of King Philip's War, down the Church's book, and you can relate some of this stuff. And again, a lot of the swamp, the Pecasset Cedar Swamp, one of the fights is up there. That's up just north of Eagleville. It's on this same glacial line through here that created these, scoured out and created the swamps in the topography. And Art's found a lot of stuff here that lends credence to that, and there's a spot on south here where he's sure there's a wintering spot where there's a big bluff, and he's found a couple of Native American artifacts there where they tended to winter in places like Wildcat Rock, where they could get out of the north wind and be in the shelter of rocks and so on, and that's where they would settle for their winter quarters. There's a place like that on south of here that he's scouted around and found a couple things. But this is these old colonial era settlements right on 8 Rod Way is really interesting. That Scipio Cook, who obviously was not a man of great means, lived there. Maybe he worked at the mill. Hard to say. Maybe someday we'll have a chance to really do some research in the land evidence records and start piecing some of this together. We'll walk up. Again, you can't see too much in the cellar hole. We'll just walk up there and look at the topography. I'll show you about where the well is. And then we're going to walk down the other side if you want to. There's a little snow down there, but if you want to, we'll look at the edge of the cedar swamp and talk about that a little bit.
Look at the size of some of those logs.
I just said that about.
This is one of the favorite hangouts over the years of kids coming in and doing their little campfires and so on, which I would have done too if I lived here when I was a kid. This also is the edge, right in here somewhere, is the boundary of the new property. So you can see that we've really got a nice valuable piece. It's the back end of that Ladue development that comes off of Lake Road. And if we hadn't have gotten that, Weetamoo Woods would have just been divided in half. And we'd have, so we acquired that.
How many acres?
17. The rear 17 of it. And it's a lot of it is the wetland, the swamp part. It's got a beautiful trail, a beautiful beach stand, a real nice laurel field over there, a little brook that runs through it, so it was really a valuable piece. But strategically it was invaluable because we now have one contiguous property here.
And Gary was the main reason that was done, by the way. Not that you would say.
Okay, I'm going to...
Humble.
Okay.
So humble.
The Cedar Swamp. The whole reason that mill site is over there is this used to be a swamp of Atlantic white cedar. Now that is a true cedar. Was a very valuable lumber for colonial times. Very light, very easy to work with hand tools, and the first colonists that came over tried to build houses like they had in Europe, using what was called a wattle and daub.
Daub and wattle, right?
Yeah, and it was basically a mortar and sticks and so on, and kind of a beam to beam, and then they'd fill in with this mortar and stick thing, a little bit like a Tudor. I mean, a real crude Tudor look to it. Didn't work in America. The temperature range over here was about twice what it is in England. So your expansion and contraction would just break up that wattle and daub. So they had to invent a new construction technique. Well, they had a gazillion trees over here, so they started looking around for trees that would work. And the Atlantic white cedar was one of them. The Atlantic white cedar only grows along the eastern seaboard where the Europeans first settled. What happens inland? It's kind of a brittle tree, and it grows in swamps. And if it gets a lot of big snowstorms and a snow load, it'll break off or it'll just fall over because it's always in a swamp, so the footing is not that great for the root system. But along the eastern seaboard, within a few miles, 50 miles, you don't get that much snow. So the Atlantic white cedar over the eons evolved to adapt to the swamplands along the eastern seaboard. So that's where you find them. You look at a map of the Atlantic white cedar range, and it's all just right up and down the eastern seaboard. most of those were milled out in colonial times because they were such a valuable timber. So that mill down there was most certainly put there primarily to harvest the Atlantic white cedar that was here. Atlantic white cedar, like most conifers, does not root sprout. In other words, if you cut it down, you know how deciduous trees, maples and oaks and so on, if you cut them down, you get, right up coppice growth, exactly. And they're very vigorous and grow very fast because there's a full root system there. Cedar trees and almost all conifers, you cut them down and they don't regenerate. So when they harvest out a swamp like this, it takes a very long time to regenerate. And this one is just now starting to regenerate, and you can see some mature Atlantic white cedar down there. They have a very typical tall spire look, narrow, pointed to the top. Now the one big tree there, that's the eastern white pine. But if you want to, we'll walk down there and you can see some of these Atlantic white cedars. It's not that bad, but if you just assume wait, we'll be right back. When you get up a little closer to them, you can see a very characteristic green look to the bark, and that's some kind of algae that grows on Atlantic white cedar bark. And they have this very striated looking bark, linear lines going up and down. I would expect that when they first got here, those cedars were as thick as grass in there. I mean, some of them along the Atlantic coast are almost impenetrable. You can almost not even walk through them. There's a beautiful place to see Atlantic white cedar swamp out on the Cape. The Marconi Station, if you've ever been there, there's a pitch pine forest and an Atlantic white cedar swamp, and it's a guided tour, and they got a boardwalk through the swamp. Really a neat place to go and see this kind of ecosystem. But as you can see, it's just now regenerating. You can see them here and there. In another 100 years, it'll be back to where it started.
How big do they get? Maturity?
Probably, they don't get too much taller than that. They start to increase in girth. But they tend to just get thicker and thicker and more of them. They're kind of slow growing, and again, slow to regenerate.
What's the age range?
I'm not real sure. I'm thinking probably 100 to 200, yeah. What happens usually is they'll blow over. There'll be some kind of storm that'll blow them over before they die of old age.
Right.
But
that's not the eastern white cedar that I've seen. I've seen
No,
eastern white cedar called arborvitae.
Okay, eastern white cedar is the same thing as northern white cedar, arborvitae. Most people call it northern white cedar. It's the one. It's the cultivated landscape tree, and there are literally hundreds of cultivars of that. But the basic native white cedar is northern white cedar or eastern white cedar. There's a western variant of it, a little different species. But no, this is Chambiciferous thioides botanically, and the northern white cedar is Thuja occidentalis. So they're related, but not exactly in the same genus, but a very similar tree in terms of the wood. The foliage is very different. The northern white cedar has that arborvitae. It looks like you've ironed
more like a juniper.
The foliage looks a little bit like a juniper, but it doesn't have that prickly look. It's a real fine leaf. But yeah, it's closer to that than the northern white cedar.
It's up to 12 maybe.
There's a more mature sassafras right there. You can tell by that kind of deep furrowed bark. And this is not a good day to see it, but in the sunshine it has kind of an orange cast. Characteristic bark, and in the sun it's probably kind of orange color. I'll tell you what, talking about this.
Oh, I thought this is
It is, yeah, it is. But by golly, the foliage of the Atlantic white cedar is not terribly different than that. It's a very tight leaf. The leaves are really scales that overlap each other and very close to the twigs. So it looks a little bit like that. Now this is our initial marking here. It goes all the way down across a little bridge. We'll walk down a little ways and then come back. But then it goes through a beach. A nice, beautiful beach grove, through the Laurel Tunnel, across a little brook, and then it comes out on the Red Trail just east of the mill site. So you come out down there, turn right, or back to the west, and you'll come out to the mill. And if it were a prettier day, we were going to make that loop, but we won't do it today. Striations on the bark.
What is it?
That's an Atlantic white cedar, a little closer look than we had over there.
That's a beauty, huh?
Here's one leg of the Borden Brook. It splits here in the swamp, and then it comes back together down by the mill site. And then down below the mill site, as Dana and I found out a couple of weeks ago, it splits into about 6 different places. I don't know where you are, but it collects again before it gets down to 4 corners. This is a slab bridge built in colonial times. It's kind of neat. Here's a couple of those yellow birches. That one there. The colors are kind of muted today. Sunshine's a little more obvious. Here's another large sassafras, single, kind of reddish, deep furrowed bark. That's a pretty good example. For some reason in the north, they don't, I'm not sure why, they don't really get that big. I know the deer chew on them when they're saplings because it's got all that chlorophyll and that flavor and sweetness and energy in the saplings, so they eat them up. But once they get up high, they don't get any bigger, I'm not sure. Down in the south, they get to be really sizable trees.
Some kind of blade I've seen on something. How much is in here?
Probably some kind of pest does it, but something keeps them from getting careless in. Sassafras is beautiful in the autumn, and I think it's kind of an overlooked landscaping tree. It's simply gorgeous. And if you get it female, it's called dioecious, so they have male and female on separate trees. Even the flower in the spring is kind of pretty. But there's not anyone's aware that it has a pretty flower. But they're really pretty nice and glorious in the fall. Here's a fairly sizable hemlock that's still alive. The hemlocks in the northeast are getting killed off by the Liliadelphic disease, which is a little aphid-like insect that's wiping them all out, and it's taking a heavy toll throughout Weetamoo Woods. That's pretty healthy. Those like the ones that are right in the swamp and doing better. So I don't know if that's any indicator of anything or not.
What's that thing?
Pardon me?
It's a hawk.
No, that's a turkey vulture.
Oh. It's a what?
A turkey vulture.
Gary?
Yeah.
I would think it was.
The more than aphids in there.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to turn around here, Mike. Yeah. Before we head back, alongside this hill, around on the other side of it, there's a ramp that was constructed in when they did the mill. I mean, this is all just it had to do because it goes right down into the swamp. There's a stone abutment on one side of it. They level off the roadway, and apparently when they were hauling out the lumber, the saw logs, they pull about that ramp, take them over to the mill site. But it's really
Is that on this property?
pretty neat. Let's see. I think it is. It's supposed to be close to the edge of it. It's not to be on the adjacent to the north. It's from one too. So, but it's kind of in a thicket. And I mean, it's not that hard to get to, but it is just around the other side of the hill. You know, someday I'm going to go out there and go and look at it. It's kind of neat to look at this thing that they built, you know, by hand and so on. Just, you know, haul the saw logs up the hillside there to get them, the hillside to get them over to the mill. Okie dokie. Well,
Okay, double time.
I think that's what a ton dump is.
you know, one in your yard is certainly doable and what you want, but you can't show it. Here's a little shrub, called a maleberry. Looks a little bit like a blueberry, but it's kind of in that same family. It's got a pretty little blossom on it. There's a little group of them along here. I've seen them when they're blooming. Here's the fruit on it, seeds.
M-A-L-E?
M-A-L-E, yeah.
That's not serviceberry.
No, serviceberry is a shadberry or juneberry. Yeah, yeah. Everybody here?
I don't know, 5 feet of it.
Here's a little shrub that's easy to identify in the wintertime. Here's another little shrub that has these catkins on it in the wintertime, these male catkins. And this one is the beaked hazelnut. It's the hazelnuts that you eat are actually European hazelnut. The nut on them is real big, and it's a tree size. This is a shrub, and there's two in America one called the American hazelnut and one called the beaked hazelnut. It's called a beaked hazelnut because the fruit has it's like a bird's head with a beak. It's a little thing. But you hardly ever notice them because they don't ever get too much bigger than this. You notice them in the wintertime because you walk along and you see these little catkins. But they're pretty little shrubs. I mean, they don't have much of a flower or anything. In fact, the flower is tiny, tiny, tiny. The female flower is a tiny little red thing, brilliant red. In the spring, you go out and you really have to look, and if you have a lens, you can get up real close and say, "Oh, isn't that beautiful?" Botanists do things like that. And then this is a male flower. But they're great wildlife food. In fact, it's so good that you hardly ever see the fruit on them because the squirrels and the birds and so on get them so quickly. Today we're just building the big gnarly growth on the side of the oak tree there. Those are both. I don't know how much is known about them, but they're started by some kind of disturbance, either a mold or a fungus or something will get in the bark, and it will disturb the growth, and they'll start this wild, irregular growth, a little bit like a gall on a tree. European oak, which we don't see over here wild. In the wintertime, you can tell the tree species a lot by the bark characteristics. You know, you can look at the buds and various things. Here's your typical red oak bark characteristic, where you get these vertical lines and the red pattern. Some people call them ski trails down the bark. The black oak that we saw earlier, kind of a black chunky bark, and then the white oak has that white scaly bark. The black birch, a lot of times you can tell that, but see that tree, it's got the split bark. Black birch tends to do that for some reason, and the big ones, they get up to pretty good size. In fact, I've read that the reason they do that, I'm not sure if I believe it or not, is in weather like this, when you have this tremendous period of cold weather, and then you get a warm sun on it, the bark swells up faster. You know, the tree is still frozen, but the bark swells up, so it tends to break up. Whereas the light-colored trees like white birch and beech and so on don't do that. I think that's probably a hypothesis, maybe not true. Anyway, you can you see dark trees split like that. You can pretty well bet it's a black birch. This is our way out. We're going to walk up here just a little ways and look at something up here, and then we'll come back. Here's another native holly species, the inkberry, which has become very popular as a landscape plant. This is the original native version. Like most landscape plants, they've done cultivars, so you see various shapes and sizes of it and so on. But this is a native one. evergreen. Has a little tiny blackberry, inkberry, and but, you know, it doesn't have much of a flower on it like most hollies, but it's a nice little shrub and a very nice landscape plant. We're gonna go right up here, kick in just about 50 yards down there, and then we'll head back and out. Okay, why would we come down here and look at this puddle? Does anybody know? Why would we come down here and look at this puddle? It's not that pretty.
It's a great cedar swamp.
No, but it is a very neat ecosystem. It's one that's kind of a smaller ecosystem, surrounded by this puddle. This is a vernal pool.
That was my next guess.
Keepers.
It really was.
Yeah.
Too late, didn't push the button.
Now, how would we know that it's a vernal pool? Anybody?
Keepers in the spring.
It's sunk.
Well,
First of all,
peepers
it's very
will
low.
actually be in year-round ponds.
Huh?
Yeah. A vernal pool is one that only has water in it in the spring and late into the summer, and then it dries out, and then on into the fall when the rains come back, it fills back up again. And they have a fascinating association of mostly amphibians that grow there. Curious thing about them is they never fill up. Like the normal pond cycle starts to get leaves and sediment in them and so on, and pretty soon the pond's gone. It's a little swamp, and then, you know, that's normally what happens to a pond. Why doesn't it happen to a vernal pool, you ask? Because there's a large family of insects, and a lot of them are known as a group as caddisflies, that their life cycle is in this vernal pool, and they consume the vegetation. Yeah. And so they eat that out every year, so it never fills up. So it's really neat. You'll see peepers there, but the species that are kind of what the biologists call obligate to the vernal pool, they're there, and it's because they're there that it's a vernal pool, is a wood frog, which is a little frog. Just a little bit bigger than a spring peeper. It has a weird little call. You come down here on a sunny afternoon after the amphibian migration, the vernal pool migration, when those amphibians go to the vernal pool. They live away from the vernal pool the rest of the year, except for during the breeding time. They come down and lay their eggs, lay their eggs. But the males, these little wood frogs, on a sunny afternoon will call, and it sounds like a little duck. It's a weird sound for a frog, and they're pretty loud. You can hear them quite a ways away on a still day. That's one species. Salamanders are big in vernal pools. They go to a vernal pool, do their thing, and then the young leave, and then they live in the woods the rest of the year. For most of the year, they're down in the hole, just sort of dormant. The biologists don't know too much about what happens in the hole. Do they just sleep all year, or what? Or do they come out and feed? We're not real sure, at least that I've read. But you need woodland area. You need a pool that dries up in the summer. You need a woodland area with a lot of litter and so on that these things can live in. And they're protected in Massachusetts legally. They have a process that if you certified as a vernal pool, in other words, state biologist comes and says, yeah, it is, because there's certain eggs and certain life that lives there. They say certificate, and it's protected further away than just normal wetland protection, so it has a level above the regular wetland protection. But it's a real fascinating area of biology.
But that's not the case in Rhode Island.
No, they have the normal wetland protection.
Okay.
It's not any different. Actually, Actually, it's not as protected. This one here would not be protected because the ponds have to be, unless there's other wetlands around here, ponds have to be a quarter acre in size or they're not protected.
So this will not.
Nope.
Except that it's in the wood. Except
Yeah,
that it's in the
this one
right.
is, yeah.
Right.
Because but if you had one
Here.
on another property, if they wanted to fill it in, unless it were a quarter acre in size, it would not fall under the freshwater
Vernal
wetlands Act.
pools, will they usually, could it ever become a quarter acre in size? Vernal pools? The ones I've seen are usually about this size.
Yeah,
Not usually large. They're very
yeah.
small areas.
Yeah, you're right.
And they're pretty sunken and
Why would that be? I don't know.
Probably
I thought
stay
about
small.
that. Yeah, I agree. I've never seen a big one.
yeah.
Maybe the big ones don't dry out, like the little ones do. Maybe there's something about the reason they need to dry out is because if they didn't dry out, there would be fish in it, and the fish would eat the caddisflies and the other things whose life cycle is in vernal pools. Herpetologists are people who study amphibians, and they get all excited in the spring watching the temperature and the rainfall because I think the criteria is the first heavy rain after it's above 40 degrees, if the ground is completely thawed, is the migration. And they're all out with flashlights at the vernal pool, and they're watching all the salamanders and the wood frogs and so on migrate back to they're like salmon. They go back to the pool where they were born.
And then lots of egg masses in there, actually.
Lots of egg masses. I can remember as a kid in Oklahoma, was first driving down a country road one dark, rainy night. I didn't know anything about vernal pools, but all I knew is in my headlights I could see frogs by the hundreds crossing the road. That's what was happening. I didn't understand that until later. But
I bet you one reason they're smaller is they need the shade. If they got bigger, they'd be open.
that's a possibility. Possibility.
It'd change the whole deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, Fort Barton. I'm pretty sure that pond, the pond that's back on the Red Trail, the main trail on the north side of Fort Barton, is a vernal pool. It dries up, and there are wood frogs in there. I haven't had a herpetologist down to look for the other signs, the egg masses and so on, that they know how to find and look for. But it's really a fascinating biological system. It depends on just it's one that can be preserved because the migration isn't that far. I think maybe up to a mile or something like that. But it's not. So you don't have to protect a lot of land like a lot of ecosystems in order to protect this system. Massachusetts has even done some. They're light years ahead of. Well, not light. They're a little bit more
Parsecs.
into formal protection of the environment and so on than Rhode Island probably is. And I think Mass Audubon has done this, but they've gotten these. They've experimented with these routes under highways and stuff because if there's a highway going through there, a lot of that stuff is killed. If it's a suburban area, as they try to migrate across it, it just wipes out the majority of it. So they've got things
to
that
get
go
the
under.
amphibians to use the.
Yeah, it's kind of a little wall, and they run into that, and the frog. Oh, okay, and it goes under the road and into the vernal pool. And in Europe, they're really into protecting. There's a vernal pool. There's similar ecosystems in Europe. They've done a lot more, but they're neat. I really have a lot of fun thinking of vernal pools. There's another one in Newfoundland. Where's that other one? Later. There's another one here.
Here?
Yeah.
There's a little close by.